Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of the Bookum Nook Show. My name is Kyle Colley, and this is a special episode of Founders Talk Podcast, a podcast for founders to tell their stories, ideas, and visions of the future. This episode is brought to you by Bookum, the book community's new and best way to host dynamic online book clubs. Download the app and start your book club today at www.bookumapp.com. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. My guest today is the delightful Danielle Robay. Danielle is the founder of PrettySmart and the host of the PrettySmart podcast. PrettySmart is a love letter to women with something to say. Danielle is a TV host. She's a journalist and has chatted with everyone from Taylor Swift to Jada Pinkett Smith. Danielle is a storyteller. She is a card game creator. She is a conversationalist. She's an avid reader, and questions are her love language. Danielle, welcome to the Founders Talk podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me, and thank you for that beautiful intro. I feel so seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of want to start with a quote you always mention from Roald Dahl's. He said, those who believe in magic will never, those who don't believe in magic will never find it. What were some of those like magical moments that have shaped your life?
I love that quote so much. I wrote it on my graduation hat as a reminder to myself, because I think another way of saying that same thing, which I've heard a lot of people that I interview say, is that like part of accomplishing anything is just believing that you can. And I have always been a person who goes after my dreams, and sometimes they feel silly, sometimes they feel too big. And what I decided was that I just want to be a person that tries, and trying to me is winning. And so that's what the magic is for me. It's just trying. I've tried to meet people like Larry King, who ended up becoming my mentor. I tried to get certain jobs, some I got, some I failed at. I've always wanted to be a person that tries.
No, I love that. And just other book quotes, like I know books play a big role in your life. So talk to us a little about other book quotes that have like stuck out and kind of helped you pave your way and your career and just in life in general.
Ooh, I like that so much. I have so many. Gloria Steinem wrote that we've begun to raise daughters more like sons, but few have the courage to raise our sons more like daughters, which I like. She also wrote, I've been using my torch to light other people's torches, because the whole idea that there's only one torch is part of the reason why we're so messed up. Everybody needs a torch. I think more than quotes necessarily, I can tell you certain books that have really changed me. One is What I Know for Sure by Oprah Winfrey. It's sort of like an anthology. And anytime I don't know what to do or I feel confused in my life, I open up that book, because the chapters are titled by words. And so I'll pick a word that feels resonant with me at the time and read that chapter. And I usually find some sort of clarity. So that's a big one. I love reading people's memoirs. I think that, Will Smith said this actually at a Kids' Choice Award show that he won years ago, that the keys to life are running and reading, because running is like, when you're on the treadmill and you feel like you can't go any further and you push yourself.
Yeah.
That feeling is so important in life, to continue going when you feel like you can't. And then secondly, books, every answer's in a book. Nobody's done anything that somebody else hasn't done before them. And so I kind of try and live my life by that, honestly. And that's what books give me. I find solace in other people's stories. I think when I've been at my highest moments, I feel celebrated by other people's stories, because I get to celebrate their wins. And when I'm at my lowest, I feel seen by other women's stories in particular. People in general, like the human spirit is amazing, but women's stories, because no matter how much, like I had acute depression in 2019, and no matter how much therapy I did or what I tried to do to dig myself out of that dark place, the only reprieve I remember having is when I was reading about somebody else's pain. And I said, okay, I'm not the only person to go through this. There's got to be a way out. There's a light at the end of the tunnel.
No, I love that. And that's really well said. even when you were talking, it kind of reminded me. So Martin Luther King's like spiritual leader, his name was
Yeah.
Howard Thurman. He talked about like the world needs people to come alive. So like when you're talking about that light, it's like the more we have those stories that you're telling that like bring out either whether you get it through reading, whether you get it through conversations, I think it really makes a big difference. And to that, like when speaking of like books that have really had a big impact in your life, like when's the last book that like kind of made you cry or like a great piece of literature that really pulled something out of you?
Ooh, I love that question. The last book that made me cry. I just read one of my friend's books. It's her memoir. Chelsea Devantes wrote,
Oh,
I
cool.
Shouldn't Be Telling You This.
Yeah, she has an awesome podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you know
Yeah.
her podcast. It's very funny, glamorous trash. But she wrote a memoir, and the part about her domestic violence made me cry. That was hard to read. Bad Vibes Only by Nora McInerney is very funny. It's about grief, but she has a very funny take on it. Oh, Ashley Elston's First Lie Wins didn't make me cry, but that I read in one plane ride. That was a
Wow.
freaking great book. That's a thriller.
No, that's good. I'm always interested to see what books have kind of shook up your life or people's life and what have inspired them to be kind of who the person who they are. So
How about you? What's the last book
shoot.
that made you really feel something?
All right. Well, I read a lot of biographies, so like sometimes I'll read about someone that like obviously passed away early in their life or something, and you're just like, wow, imagine the life that they could have lived. That they, I mean, even though they lived a great life, but it's like imagine
Yeah.
another 20 years with this person. So I was reading about Reginald Lewis. He started, he like bought into a company, like first black uh founder that had like $1 billion exit, but he had like brain cancer at like age 40 or something. So it was just like super sad, especially like 3 years after buying the company. But like those type of stories get me the most, I think. Or like, I don't know. Those are some of the ones that usually get me. But
Yeah.
yeah. Speaking of that a little bit, like when it goes into like since this is Founders Talk podcast, I always like to hear the stories behind companies that people start. So talk to us a little bit about Pretty Smart and like you talk about some of the origins, the brand, and how you got some of those early guests to support you.
For sure. I started Pretty Smart in February of 2021. It was born out of COVID because my mentor was Larry King.
Yeah.
And when I would have breakfast with him sometimes, he'd always be like, "You need your own show." And I was like, they're not really like handing out shows like they used to, Larry. It's just like a different ball game now. And he would always say it to me. And so when COVID started, all of my jobs that I had were stalled. I was working at IMDb, I was working at NBC4 in LA, and everything kind of halted. And I had time on my hands. And speaking of quotes, Shakespeare has this quote that idle hands are the devil's playthings. And I believe in that. I'm not good with idle hands. I like to be doing things very goal oriented. It makes me happy. So I thought now's the time to launch the show that I've always wanted to make. I have some time. And so I'd had this idea for Pretty Smart for years. And I finally got to put it in motion. So basically, the origin story is I am a TV host and journalist, and I was doing a morning show in Chicago. And I read this book called Beauty Sick, and it's by Dr. Renee Engeln. She's a psychologist out of Northwestern. And I open the first page, and one of the first studies that she cites is that 54% of women would rather be hit by a truck than considered fat.
Wow.
And my stomach dropped when I read that because, you know, I had done a lot of work on healing my relationship to food and my body. And if you had asked me in high school, I probably would have said hit by a truck, or is it a Prius, or how fast is the truck going? And when I read that, I felt really kind of embarrassed that that's how I felt, because I had been given this beautiful life, this beautiful opportunity, and I was so consumed by food, I guess, and how I looked. And so I started thinking about the most beautiful women in my life and the most beautiful women I'd ever interviewed. And I started asking people who the most beautiful women they thought, like, who were the most beautiful women. And not one person said, that girl on Instagram or the one from that commercial. Everybody said their mother, their grandmother, their sister, their daughter. And I thought, you know what that is? It's because the most beautiful women are bumped and bruised and scarred, and they're so imperfect. They're perfectly imperfect. And so I thought I want to interview people who put a new spin on pretty, pretty bold, pretty witty, pretty strong, pretty smart. And I had gotten to interview so many people in Hollywood from my previous career as an entertainment reporter. And a lot of these women are really brilliant. They just weren't really given an opportunity to answer interesting questions. They were being asked, "What are you wearing?" and like nonsense. And so I thought, okay, let me interview women who put a new spin on pretty and see where I can take this and have it be intergenerational and diverse and smart and cerebral, and really get to the root of women's stories and what women, millennial women, care about. Because there were podcasts that I listened to that I thought were really awesome and cerebral and fun and entertaining, but they were hosted by like 50-year-old women. And because of the age difference, I'm 33, I launched it when I was 30, I think, that they weren't really asking some of the questions I was curious about. And so I wanted to launch a cerebral, fun podcast for people my age, women my age. And ultimately, that turned into more of a larger brand. So I have a question everything card game, which is 52 cards for deeper conversation. And really, I started doing some research on entrepreneurship. You probably know much more about this than I do, but some of the best companies that I've read about aren't really what they seem. So, for instance, the company Bays by Shay Mitchell, they're a suitcase company, but she says, no, actually, we're a movement company. We make products for people on the go. And I started thinking about my business differently. And I thought, I am a connection company. I'm a company about connection. And what's at the root of that? It's questions. And that's what I do. I ask questions for a living. So I'm starting to build out new products under that brand. I'm going to have new card games, new question decks, like expansion packs, and hold some live events to foster real connection, because I think we live in a very high communication, low connection type of world. And yeah, that's the gist of it.
Yeah, and your team, you and your team do a great job. I love the marketing and just like the feel of the podcast. Like every time you watch it, just feels like you're just having a conversation. And as you said, that mindset of being seen, right? And I think about even when you're talking about different women's stories throughout time, I was watching Maya Angelou's documentary, and it's just also those are the type of people that really, when you hear their story, it changes something in you, right? Because you're like, how
Oh,
did this
yeah.
person persevere through all this? Like so many people would have quit, so many people would have stopped. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. There's something you kept saying. You said cerebral, and I know you talk about having like a cerebral entertainment. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Nobody's ever really asked me that, Kyle. I hope I don't sound like a I don't know. I hope I don't sound like on a high horse when I say this, but I love pop culture. I grew up watching every TV show, reading all those tabloid magazines. I loved movies, and I grew up in Chicago, and I thought I just want to get to LA and I want to work in Hollywood and entertainment. And then I was a political science major and I did local news. And I realized that the reason I love pop culture is that I think it reflects where we are and where we're going in culture. And I'll give you an example. Like, um, for instance, with Caitlyn Jenner,
Okay.
regardless of what you think about Caitlyn Jenner, Bruce transitioning into Caitlyn became such a hot button issue in pop culture that it gave people a way in to talk about trans rights. And
Mhm.
all of a sudden, at the water cooler at work, at your dinner table, people were talking about trans rights like they never had before. And I think every minority group and every issue can kind of be tied to a pop culture moment too. And it gives us the vocabulary and the words and sort of the mutual link to discuss it. And so I love to see pop culture as a mirror reflecting where we are and where we're going. And that's what I mean about cerebral entertainment is it's not just like what is J Lo or Kim Kardashian wearing? It's like, you know, all the comments on Kim's photos are a lot of them are pretty crude, and it's like, why do we desexualize moms in America?
Yeah.
Um, and so I think there's just larger, broader conversations to be had based on pop culture moments.
No, that's great insight. Cause even when you were talking, it made me even think like a Magic Johnson, like how much he even,
Oh, right. That's a
yeah, like
great example.
when you're saying, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But like that happens with pop culture. It allows us to have those conversations in a space where now we're doing commentary, but now you're like, how do you feel about this? Or what's your opinion
Yes.
process on that?
Oh,
Uh,
I love that
yeah.
example, Kyle. Yeah.
When you're talking, I mean, on a side note, like when talking about your, like as an entrepreneur, the sacrifice and all the things that come with building a brand, and you give up so much. You give up your Saturday nights, you give up your Fridays. You're always kind of on, even when you're like, when you're doing other things sometimes. Talk to me when it comes to like friendships and relationships. How do you balance it? And when I say balance, I mean like harmony. How do you kind of make everything work?
This is a hard one for me. I'm not sure I do make everything work. I try my very best because at the heart of who I am is connection, right? So, like, I would be a big hypocrite if I was building a company on connection and not fostering it in my own life. I very much do. My friends joke like any coffee meeting I have goes from like it can never just be 45 minutes, it'll be 2 or 3 hours because I just am dying to hear about the real stuff about a person, like I don't want to go surface. I'm trying so hard to be a good interviewee. I am dying to ask you questions right now. And I think that I have sort of like circle 1, 2, 3, and 4. And my circle 1 is like drop everything no matter what. They come before work.
Yeah.
And then everything else, circle 2, 3, and 4 are kind of tiered, right? And so circle 2 knows that I love you so much, but I may not get back to you right away. It may take me a few days. Circle 2 knows you may have to text me a few times. And circle 3, I don't know, it's tough. I may see you when I see you or see you on it. I'll be cheering for you virtually on Instagram, but I can't be there for everything, and that's just part of it. But I've always been such like a purpose driven person that it's not hard for me to prioritize work because I freaking love it. And then tier 1 and 2 get prioritized.
Yeah, I think about it similar. Like you got your inner circle, and then you have like the outer circle where you're still like it's your people, but it's a different relationship. It's like your inner circle, you tell them some of the moves you're making, like, hey, we're about to do this, we're about to do that. And outer circle, you kind of like they're your friends, but they'll sometimes know once you actually like do it. So
That's exactly it. You
yeah, I
get it.
understand you a lot on that one.
Can I ask you one quick
Yeah, go
question?
ahead. Yeah, of course.
How'd you get interested in entrepreneurship and founders? What was the catalyst for that?
Well, I guess there's a younger age part and then an older age part. When I was younger, I remember Jay-Z, I remember Roc Nation like becoming a thing, right? And I
Yeah.
remember that was the first time that I saw that someone, I was young, but that was the first time I could see like you could do music and you can do sports. Like I didn't know that was even a
Yeah.
thing. Like I didn't know you could cross over genres. I thought the way life was, you kind of walk that path and you're not supposed to move outside of it or anything, but you're supposed to walk that path. And then
Okay.
obviously when I said that, my parents were like, oh, you might as well go to, you got to do what Jay-Z did, you got to go to law school and, be a poli-sci major and all these things. But I realized that with entrepreneurship, most of it is just getting into the game, right? So then once I started just reading books, I started learning about these founders and you just get excited. You're like, wow, these people are building incredible things. And you kind of want to be the type of person that, add your mark on the world, even if it's a small thing, big thing, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And I think if I'm hearing you correctly, you feel the same way that I do, that like reading other people's stories of doing it gives you like the inspiration and the confidence to know that you can do it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you see those stories and they motivate you. And then speaking of that, because you have interviewed a lot of authors, I'm curious to hear like what authors have like pushed your worldview and like kind of what was the reasoning for that, or like what's some big lessons you've learned from them when it comes to even writing or anything like that.
Writers are my rock stars, and Oprah has said that. So I'm borrowing that phrase from her, but it is true. Like I think that artists focus our attention. That's what great art does for us. That's, you mentioned Jay-Z. That's what he does for people. He helps focus our attention. And I think great writing is under that category for me. And so, like, the greatest compliment anybody could give me, like when I do a podcast, if somebody DMs me and is like, ooh, you made me think about that differently. Oh my God, that is the greatest compliment for me. So that's what writers do for me. They make me think about things differently. So I'm actually, Kyle, you have to keep me accountable because I always say that my mornings are like fire drills. I am not a routine type of a person. I always get my
Okay.
workout in, but other than that, it's like a shit show until I get to work. And I am determined to have a reading practice in the morning because
Gotcha.
everybody I read about that I really respect reads 20 minutes to an hour a day minimum.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I've been reading books for work because I interview people. And so I'm doing a show with Hello Sunshine. So I've been reading a lot of Reese's book club picks that are
Yeah.
so fun. But I have not been reading the news. I have not been reading editorial pieces. I have not been reading op-eds. And I got to get back into the game. So I'm going to try to read minimum 20 minutes every morning.
Yeah, we'll keep you honest. I was funny enough. I used to be a big morning reader, but then I've moved into just being like a night reader. I enjoy
Yeah.
that reading right before bed, but that's to each his own.
I fall asleep is the problem if I
See,
read right before
that's what I
bed.
figure some people say.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk to me about like interviews, right? Like when you
Yeah.
you've talked to, like I said earlier, you've talked to people as like Jada Pinkett Smith, Taylor Swift. They say like don't meet your heroes. Sometimes people say that, but I'm curious,
Yeah.
and someone that has met a lot of people's heroes, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that opinion and that when people say stuff like that?
You know what? A lot of people have been really kind to me and even cooler than I expected. I've had the few people that have been not cool, but it's very rare to be honest. I think the bigger somebody is, usually the kinder that they are. That's been my experience. It's usually like the D-list reality stars that give you a hard time. And even now, the reality stars with the internet just know that they got to play the game and be nice. When I started doing entertainment, they were a little spicier, but yeah, I don't know if I agree with that. I think people are just people, and so perfectly imperfect, like if they had a bad day, that I'm sorry for that person. That's on them. I always I have to be honest, I part of my journalism and my approach to interviewing is kindness. And I know that sounds really corny, but it's true because it's a core principle of who I am. And I know that my questions come from a place of integrity. They come from a place of kindness. Even if they're probing, they come from a place of kindness because it's giving that person a fair opportunity to speak on something. And so if they're unkind to me, I can usually pretty quickly assess like my culpability in that. And as I've gotten older, I think I've gotten more practice. And so I'm probably like less culpable. At the beginning, I maybe asked some things that were out of line because I just didn't know. But now I'm like, if they're not cool, then that's on them.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and especially when it comes to those different conversations, getting more familiar with someone, those probing questions. It's like
Yeah.
it's all about how you ask them and how and the I guess also how people feel, with in the mix of the conversation, how you what answer you get from them, right?
Yeah, and I try to come from a place of non-judgment always. Like
Yeah,
the reason I loved interviewing Jada Pinkett Smith was I felt like the media didn't really give her a fair media run with her book. The questions were pretty like biased. You could tell people already had formed an opinion before they asked. And I've actually like always really thought Jada added a lot to culture, to feminism. And so I think I came from a different place. And I do think that interview showcased that.
no, I love that, and I think that is such an important thing in this world now. Is like having those conversations with people that are like, people try to, I don't use the word cancel all the time, but whatever it is, like you want to say, oh,
Yeah.
this is this person's stigma, therefore I'm not even going to talk to them. But I think when people, especially like yourself, have those conversations and give people a full hour, whatever, 2 hours to speak what's on their mind and what there's on their heart, I
Yeah,
think you get to see them from a different lens, and it gives them that platform to be who we've known them to be too, right? Like who
for
we've always
sure.
appreciated.
That's the goal.
Yeah, so when you're talking to those, and then when it comes like silence and conversation, I'm always like interested how people handle those moments. Like, what makes silence tough to master in a conversation, interview, etc.
I think I finally got that in the last year or so. It took me a long time to be comfortable with silence, but I realize sometimes the less I say, the more they say. And sometimes people need a beat. It's not the first thought, it's the second thought.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And so I've learned to chill and let someone talk. And I think that's when some of the most interesting things come out. And I interviewed Craig Melvin on Pretty Smart, and he's a Today Show anchor. And he said the same thing. He had the same advice. And I was like, I agree. Sometimes the most interesting things come out in silence.
No, I love that because I was watching an interview with Emma Chamberlain. I guess a lot of times when people interview her, they cut her off, even though she like can get to a point over time. And she was in an interview, and somebody was like, "I'm so glad the interviewer just let her have her moment to talk," because like she always comes up with these unique things and sayings and stuff. But when you cut somebody off, even if you're trying to get that next question in, you miss those bright moments of them just like letting their brain get everything else. Like really interesting.
Interesting. I think that works in a recorded interview. If you're
True.
live, sometimes you do have to cut. Like
Yeah.
Larry King was good at cutting people off in a really in a thoughtful way. So there's an art to both.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. Speaking of that, like when it comes to not asking questions, like what are some questions that you look back on an interview and you're like, dang, why not ask that? Or what made me not follow up there?
Oh man, so many of those. Barbara Walters talks about that was like that plagued her. After every interview, she would watch it and be like, I should have asked this. I should. It's all those questions that you don't ask, that you forget to ask. I have to tell you, there's always going to be a question that you don't pick up on the first time. Um, and that's just life, and that's okay. I think that the more that I've experienced in my life, the more hardship or pain that I've experienced, the more I'm able to pick up with other people because I can feel them. I
Yeah.
have like a sensitivity chip almost now. And I still miss things, but I miss a lot less. Um, I think part of that is growing up and living life. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. It's
Yeah.
just the ability to continue, just connect and get to the bottom of it. Whether, I mean, even if you don't ask the question, if as long as you are, well, at least for me, because my focus is always as the interviewer to give my audience what they want to hear from different
Yes.
things. Like specifically, like with talking with you, I want to get into questions because you've done it at such a high level. So like when people watch this interview, regardless, they're like, wow, I really understand how Danielle thinks about questions and how she formulates and how she creates stories, with when you're doing journalism, it's like, what story are we telling? How do you think about those things? So I'm always
Yeah.
curious about that. Speaking of that, I do want to shift to you as a creator because I think as so much like being a founder, you are an artist. Your company is a
Oh,
piece of
thank
art,
you.
right? So like, what is your process for being a content creator and thinking about that when it comes to questions and building your brand?
In terms of content, I always try to add value. I've heard Gary Vee talk about that pretty like
Yeah,
widely or broadly, but that's who I want to be as a person. I want to walk into every room IRL and add value to somebody's life. And I want to do that URL, like I don't want it to be beautiful nonsense. I don't want to come out in a cute dress if I'm not saying something. Like, I really want you to leave whatever video you're watching of mine and say, hey, that made me think, or I'm curious now, or hey, maybe I should chat about that with my boyfriend or girlfriend that night. And that's really my goal is to spur curiosity and connection and to make people feel seen. Um, so yeah, I think in terms of like how actual process, I have none. I have one for Pretty Smart because it's a weekly podcast, and so we have that down. But in terms of my own content creation, I just put out whatever is on my mind. Like if I had a conversation with my dad that made me think about something that day, I make a video.
yep.
I'm about to put one out about poker.
See, that makes sense. And then
Yeah.
how do you approach your like building community and building engagement? 'Cause I think that is a very big part of building a company as well.
I don't know, Kai. Like I think like I could probably use some help. Um, I've noticed on the internet things that are controversial get the most engagement, and that's tough for me because I'm not really like trying to be a controversial person. I just want to put information out into the world and have people think. So I don't know if I have the best answer for that. What I do know is that I'm a really sincere person. And so I like chatting with people online if I have the time. And I'm never going to just say thanks or heart something. Like, I'm probably going to be asking you questions. We're going to go back and forth. Like, I like to have a dialogue. I want to know about you. Sometimes I send random people my card game if they send me something that really touches me. Like, I want sort of that URL to IRL connection. And that's what I crave. So it's what I try to give people.
Yeah, so you build community through like caring and in those touch points. I think that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Sincerity.
Yeah, as a creator, you were also selected to Hello Sunshine's collective. I wanted to know like how has that like being surrounded by a lot of groundbreaking women like really impacted your life in
Yeah.
that sense?
Oh my God, it's been amazing. I mean, I wanted to work for Hello Sunshine since the company was founded because
Yeah.
I really align with all of their values. And so I'm now doing a podcast with them, and the Hello Sunshine Collective is full of, I think it's 14 women who are groundbreaking in all their respective industries. And so to pick their brains about how they started their platforms, how they think about their content creation, how they think about growing, how they think about connecting, like all these questions you asked me is so valuable to be around people who are doing things at a high level. It's just like a mind meld. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think Hello Sunshine's doing such a great job. I think they're literally playing chess, and while other
Yeah.
people in the book space are playing checkers. I just think every move they've made is just like very impressive. I love what they're doing. So like when it comes to the daily
Likewise.
podcast, I know that's a very much different than what you do at a pretty smart. So how's that been? Just like that switch, and what's even the process for doing a daily podcast look like?
Oh man, I love doing a daily show. It's a lot of work because you're producing something 5 days a week and you don't really have an off switch. But I get to have so many conversations. Like I think it was Malcolm Gladwell who said, like, you're an expert at 10,000 hours. Like, I'm really getting my hours in. I think I've probably had 3,000 hours of professional conversation over the course of my career so far. So I still have more hours to go to be a professional conversationalist, but I'm racking my hours up with this podcast, and I get to do it with my co-host. And I think that we try to have conversations that give space for women to have. It's not necessarily like we're trying to make news. We really like we we're having meaningful conversations, and I can tell when the guests leave, they're like, "Oh, thank you for those questions," or "Thank you for that heart." Like, we're just having like a different type of conversation, and so it's called The Bright Side, and it's very much it's supposed to brighten your day, and I hope it's doing that for people.
Yeah, I listened to the first episode with Reese Witherspoon. I always like when people have podcasts, like what were some of the takeaways you had from that specific or just in general, like learning from Reese?
She's pretty amazing. And I think that episode, one thing she said shocked me because she had been an actress in all these really well-known movies, Legally Blonde, Cruel Intentions. Like, there was a huge list of films that she had been a lead actress in. And you could tell just by talking to someone how smart they are. Like, she's super smart. She went to Stanford. She's a
Yeah.
smart cookie. So she said in that interview that when she wanted to start Hello Sunshine, she had a lot of trouble getting investors. All these people wouldn't take her seriously. And I was thinking, if people aren't taking Reese Witherspoon seriously, who are they taking seriously? Like, nothing is easy. It is so hard to create anything. And so I thought that was really valuable that she shared that, because it's like, yeah, there's no easy button for anybody.
I had that exact same takeaway. I was sitting there, I was like, wow, that really but it's again, when I heard that, I was like, that's just a very founders specific story. We go through that, it's like even
Yep.
even as if you're as big as Reese, you still have those moments where people doubt you. But it's always good to,
Wild.
sometimes you gotta prove them wrong. Uh,
Yeah.
let's end by I always like getting into some rapid fire, but right before that, I would love to talk about your reading preferences. Like what book were you reading last? What are you reading now? And what do you plan to read next?
Okay, I just finished the Diane von Furstenberg memoir.
Okay.
I'm hoping to interview her, so I wanted to finish her book. It was fabulous. There's a quote that she says about living by kismet and character that I am now going to apply to my life, which is like kismet is destiny. She says you can't control your destiny, but you can control your character, who you are on the way there. And I love that.
That documentary's coming out, right, too? Like recently? Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. At the end of the month. What I'm reading currently, Build Like a Woman, Kathleen Griffith. And it's about how to build a life and a career that you love.
Gotcha.
Uh, and I really like her. I got to interview her on PrettySmart, and I think she has a lot of valuable things to say, a lot of good insight. I'm reading The Last Lecture.
Okay.
It's sort of like a huge, it's an older book. It's a national bestseller, but it's supposed to be pretty life-changing. Like a lot of people have that on their best book ever list, and I've never read it. And so I'm reading that.
Very nice. Let's get into some rapid fire. I did throw in some like some of your questions, like question
Love it.
everything. So it'll be a little mix of everything, or at least built upon them.
Fantastic.
What's like an important book that no one's talking about?
Great question. What is an important book that nobody's talking about? I love A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson. It's an older book, so nobody's really talking about it,
Okay. All right.
but
That
it's
sounds good.
really a good one. Let me think. Oh, Cast is an amazing book.
Great book.
Ava DuVernay adapted it
Yep.
for the screen, and
Or-
nobody's talking about that anymore either. And that's a really important book.
That is a great book. What's an important in that same lane, like a TV show, movie, or documentary that no one's talking about but you love?
Oh, I love Tyler Perry's documentary so much. I
Oh,
didn't see that
really?
much buzz for it.
I haven't seen that one.
Oh my God, he had me wailing at the end.
I gotta
I've
check
never
that out.
cried in a doc like that.
Really? Okay. Yeah, I gotta check
Yeah,
that out.
that was amazing.
All right. So a living artist or creator you would like to have dinner with. I think you actually already said this one.
I would love to have dinner with Diane von Furstenberg, with Hillary Clinton, with Will Smith. I know it's controversial nowadays, but
I'm a fan of Will.
um, yeah, I like people who are change makers.
Yeah. So this is from your card game. What would your younger self not believe about your life today?
She would not believe that I was unmarried in a one-bedroom apartment living in LA at 33 and a half years old, grinding away, hustling. She would not believe that I was a founder of a company or that I started my own show. But I think she'd be proud of my courage.
Yeah, proud nevertheless. Which temptation do you try the hardest to resist?
Ice cream. I love ice cream. And sometimes I try to stop myself from asking people questions because sometimes it's not appropriate to ask questions or to probe. And I have to hold my tongue because I am very curious.
Very on brand. What do you need help with most right now?
Thank you for asking. I need help with boundaries. I am constantly I like to I'll give you another quote since we both love quotes, but something I live by is Shirley Chisholm's quote, which is service is the rent you pay for a room on this earth. And I live by that, and I believe in that, and I want to be a person that helps other people, and I want to be a person who connects. And I my schedule has gotten really nuts with this daily show, and I'm struggling to be a person who helps and also be a person who helps myself.
Very nice. We'll make sure to check in. The way I like to end this podcast, I'll change it a little bit, or it can be more broad. I usually ask, what would you like to see more of in the book world? But if there's anything you'd like to see in the world, let us know that as well.
Oh, you know what? I think the book world is antiquated. The way that we publish books is antiquated. I'd love to see some modernity in the book world, some updates of the process. I interview a lot of authors, and it's a very difficult process for them. I'd love to see like an author first publishing world. And I think we're doing a better job with diverse stories, but we could probably always do better. I think that's really important. Everyone needs to be able to see themselves in books, in characters, in memoirs and stories. And in the world, I would love a little more wisdom. I learned a few years ago when Larry King passed away, because I was writing sort of an in memoriam about him, that one of the definitions of wisdom is to be able to hold two opposite truths at the same time. And I think as a culture, we're having trouble doing that, holding two opposite truths at one time. And I think we have a lot of hot takes and a lot of opinions and a lot of points of view, but not a ton of wisdom.
Yep, I agree. And on the other side, it can be a completely different answer, but what would you like to see less of in the book world or in the world in general?
Less influencer books. Don't care about your take on dating. Don't care about content, writing a book about content creation unless it's like very interesting. If you happen to be an influencer and you're also a beautiful writer, then go for it and live your dreams. But other than that, just because you have a following does not mean you should be writing a book. Books are important pieces of work.
Go. I look at that. That was a hot take to end the conversation. Danielle, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Please let us know anything that's coming up in your world that we should support, or where we can find you on the internet.
Thanks, Kyle. Support one another. Call someone you love today and tell them that you love them. But you could find me at Danielle Robay, Robay, on all of the internets. I'm the same girl on all the platforms. And you are so smart and so dynamic and building something that I really believe in. So I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I truly appreciate your words. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.